Well, Democrats are trying to pick apart the Trump administration one person at a time. We also have judges who believe they have more legal authority than the sitting president of the United States. To help me go through this and other big stories, I have Josh Hammer. Josh, thank you for joining me again.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me back on.
So, Josh is the host of the Josh Hammer Show. He's a writer and author. He's also senior editor over at Newsweek and author of Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. Josh, something that's really bothering me lately is these lower court judges, activist judges, judges that we're now finding out have familial connection to money being pushed out by USAID. What are your thoughts on these lower judges controlling the president of the United States? And where do you see this going in order to continue to push the Trump agenda forward?
Well, Stephen, I've been utterly excoriating what I refer to as a judicial insurrection since day one. Frankly, I don't think judicial activism actually goes far enough. I think what we're watching right now is basically a mass left of center judicial uprising. Now, the key point is that this is simply a continuation of the first Trump term. So the first Trump presidency faced, by my count, I think the exact number is 64 so-called nationwide injunctions, this notion that a lower court judge can bring the entirety of a federal program to a halt there. Interestingly, Stephen, that is more than the first 44 presidents faced combined, and there's a reason for that, which is that the notion of a so-called nationwide injunction wasn't a thing, so to speak, until the late 1960s. It's a fairly recent phenomenon. And the reason, in turn, that it is a recent phenomenon is because it's made up. Because it's not actually constitutional. It far, far exceeds the legitimate boundaries of what the judicial power of Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution speaks. I'm a lawyer by background. The judicial power actually refers to the power of a court to bind the litigants to a lawsuit. So the plaintiff and defendant, the people that are actually before the judge there, you are assessing the facts and applying the law or applying the facts to the law there. That's who gets bound. This notion that you can bind anyone beyond your courtroom, let alone bind everyone across the entire country, is utterly preposterous and completely ludicrous. So something is going to have to happen here. We very much are at this point where we're facing a legal crisis, dare I even say a constitutional crisis. But the interesting thing is that constitutional crisis is not coming from who they say it's coming from. They're saying that it's coming from President Trump, that he's barreling full speed ahead there, and Elon Musk and Doge. Look, there is going to be energy in the executive. Anyone who's read the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton, Federalist number 70, famously says that we have to have a unitary executive for reasons of efficiency and secrecy and dispatch and energy, frankly. The president is a kinetic position by his very nature there. But these lower court judges have to be made to be put back into line. And there's all sorts of tools that are at Congress's disposal here. They have a lot of tools to possibly rein in an out-of-control judiciary. You can enact jurisdiction stripping legislation to basically take certain types of jurisdiction away from these federal judges, put it back into state court judges that might be a little bit more sympathetic there. There's, of course, judicial impeachment, which various congressmen have already filed articles of judicial impeachment to. There's other things you can do as well there, but frankly, something has to happen, and something has to happen in a pretty big way. SCOTUS also, the Supreme Court, has to take up the issue as to the constitutionality or lack thereof of these so-called nationwide injunctions. That is very, very overdue, and when they do so, they have to rule correctly, namely that these things are totally unconstitutional and illegal.
Okay. There's been a lot of talk about, we always know how the 4 liberal judges are going to vote, but we never know how the other 5 conservative judges. There's now talks of, is John Roberts compromised in some way, or is he maybe just more center than right? Amy Coney Barrett, was she a mistake? Your thoughts on, is the Supreme Court going to have to step in and make a ruling on these lower courts, or what is the mechanism of the Supreme Court so that Trump can move forward?
So, Stephen, I write a syndicated column every week that goes up in Newsweek, where I work, and a bunch of other primarily right-of-center publications, actually including the Los Angeles Times most recently. And my column this past week was actually on this exact topic, as to Chief Justice John Roberts, who just last week excoriated Donald Trump for calling for judicial impeachment. The great irony of John Roberts is that when he was nominated to be Chief Justice of the United States back in 2005, you go back and watch the tape of his Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearing, he has this very grand, lofty statement where he vows that the role of the judge in our constitutional order is akin to that of an umpire at a baseball game, as someone who is outside of the main focus and whose job it is to simply call balls and strikes. As John Roberts said back in 2005, no one goes to a baseball game to watch the umpire. You go to watch the pitcher, the batter, and so forth there. Well, unfortunately, ever since John Roberts has actually gone to the court, he has not listened to his own prognostication. He continually, time and time again, decides to do not what the law actually requires in a very straightforward, textual, legal, interpretive manner. Rather, he tries to do time and time again what he idiosyncratically deems to be best for the court's institutional integrity. We saw this back in 2012, the first time in the Obamacare case, NFIB versus Sebelius, where we now know very clearly that John Roberts initially intended to join the conservatives on the court in striking down the Obamacare individual mandate, but he then decided to basically try to throw breadcrumbs to both sides by saying, oh, actually, the mandate's not constitutional under the Commerce Clause, but you know what? It's not really a mandate. It's actually a tax. I'm going to rewrite this thing as a tax there. So that was the beginning of Roberts' evolution as to a justice who doesn't really call balls and strikes. He's willing to do whatever he can to try to make everyone happy. He has this very kind of self-aggrandizing conception of the role of the Chief Justice, and it continually bites him in the rear end there. And frankly, ironically, it actually undermines the institutional integrity of the very court that he purports to care so much about. So if Roberts wants to get us back to a place where the American people have a lot of faith in the judiciary in general, and especially in the Supreme Court, he should stop doing this ridiculous exercise on repeat of just trying to somehow make everyone happy. Forget that. That's not your role, man. Your role is to actually just interpret the law in front of you, constitution, treaty, statute, whatever it is, and apply the law. That's the role of the empire. I want John Roberts to get back to that. Frankly, I'm not sure that he will. As far as Amy Coney Barrett, I do think in retrospect that she was a mistake there. And frankly, I think this is a very important opportunity for conservatives to look back at what happened and to make sure that this never happens again. Now, I'm not saying that Amy Coney Barrett is going to become the next David Souter, like the next Republican nominee who just consistently joins the liberals. That's not my claim, and I frankly don't think it's going to happen there. But she does seem to be a very close ally of John Roberts in the mushy middle of the court there. I think what happened in retrospect, Stephen, is two things. One is that Amy Coney Barrett did not have a very sizable track record. She was basically an academic, and a somewhat obscure academic at that, at Notre Dame Law School, someone who didn't even have a particularly prolific academic record, didn't have a whole lot of heavily cited articles, the various ways that you rank legal academics there. She gets tapped to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in the first year or so of Donald Trump's presidency. And if you go back and remember what happened then, at her Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearing for her Seventh Circuit seat, we actually allowed the late California Senator Dianne Feinstein to basically make Amy Coney Barrett a folk hero, where she had this statement that clearly was dripping with anti-Catholic bigotry, but she says, the dogma lives loudly within you. It was this clip that went viral at the time there. And again, very bigoted statement, wrong. But because she said that, I think social conservatives allowed Amy Coney Barrett to become a folk hero. We basically got in our minds here that she's one of us. She's going to rally for our conservative cause there. We basically let this far left California senator pick our own folk hero for us there. So we can't do that again. The way to pick justice is based on the record, based on the merits there. Again, she's not a total disaster. That's not my claim there, but she definitely is disappointing.
Okay. Do you think Trump was maybe rushed in his decision? I mean, these were like the final days of his presidency. He was trying to get one more conservative on the bench.
Well, I think what happened was, so I remember it very well. It feels like it was just yesterday, although I guess it was 4.5 years ago now. So it's September 2020. It is right before the presidential election, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. So that's kind of the key point here, is that the Trump administration was seeking to fulfill Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat. Ginsburg, an iconic liberal progressive jurist, was kind of this trailblazing feminist. She was a lawyer for the ACLU there. So in this kind of post-George Floyd, kind of broader woke DEI milieu, the mentality seemed to seep in overnight into the Trump administration that they had to nominate a woman to fill Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seats. That never should have been the mentality. I mean, I'm not sure who thought this was a good idea. And to be clear, in fairness, They vetted one or two male judges just to kind of make sure that they weren't exclusively interviewing female judicial candidates there. But from day one, it was basically down to two women above all. It was down to Amy Coney Barrett or or Judge Barbara Lagoa down here in the state of Florida on the 11th Circuit there. That never should have been the case. Here, there, and everywhere, you have to pick judges just based on the merits without paying any attention to skin color or what your chromosomal structure is or anything like that there. So there's a good way to do this, and frankly, I'm not sure the method was done the correct way last time.
Okay. Well, I mean, I see a lot of Republicans say, oh, the fact that they want just a woman that's black, that's not good, right? And then, we end up picking just one gender that had to fill the seat of one gender. So that's interesting feedback. I appreciate that. Okay. I feel like the Democrats are taking this Signal texting app story, and they're trying to turn it from Signal mistake into Signalgate. The head of the CIA is saying this is not Watergate 2.0. These are approved apps. It came preloaded on my computer, for heaven's sakes. Now, Politico, they're dropping all of the evidence. Your thoughts on the Signal situation with Pete Hegseth and Mike Walls and others?
So a few things here. So there's various layers to this story, right? So on the question as to whether or not they were inherently wrong for using Signal, I don't really have a strong opinion on that. I'm not one who's going to criticize them for using Signal. As you mentioned, John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, said that this was literally preloaded on their devices. It actually looks like Joe Biden and his administration was the one that actually really kind of normalized and mainstream Signal's use for federal government employees. Look, in a personal capacity, there are any number of people on Capitol Hill or in the executive branch who I message on Signal. It's not exactly a well-kept secret that people in Washington, D.C. and political circles love Signal. So I don't have a huge objection to Signal, which above all probably is a more secure and more encrypted app than many other messaging options. Now, having said that, if you're going to use it, verify who's in the group chat, right? So to me, the much bigger story, the much bigger deal is that no less a left-wing activist than Jeffrey Goldberg finds his way into this group chat. That to me is astonishing. I mean, we should not mince words there. That is absolutely astonishing stuff. Jeffrey Goldberg is a bad faith actor. He personally blocked me on social media a decade ago for criticizing him. He's someone who carries water day in and day out for the Democratic Party and its partisan initiatives. He's someone who was utterly excoriating the Trump administration time and time again. So it is completely dumbfounding how he somehow found his way into this chat. The operating theory, as you likely know, is that he has the same initials, JG, as the U.S. Trade Representative, a man by the name of Jamison Greer. Someone probably meant to add Greer. They added Goldberg instead. That's a very, very bad mistake. And there should be a fall guy if that is actually what happened. I don't think it should be Mike Waltz himself, who I think is a good man and qualified for the job. But whatever the junior level staffer was, there has to be some fall guy. In my opinion, the administration should just own it and say, someone messed up here. Here's the fall guy. We learned our lesson. We're moving on. That's basically the end of the story there. It's not the Watergate-esque scandal, obviously, that the left is making it out to be there, but it definitely is bad. And in an ideal world, these messages would not be public because I don't want to give Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and the Ayatollah transparency into how the vice president, the secretary of defense, secretary of state, how he actually deliberates critical national security mission stuff. I mean, that's not the kind of thing that should be public there. So it's not good. But as long as the administration learns the right lessons moving forward there, I'm not going to really lose sleep over it either.
Okay. I got up early today. I read through all of the messages that are public thus far. And honestly, it made me respect the Trump administration even more, how they were discussing things, trying to have President Trump's back while also protecting him from maybe moving too quickly on something, taking into account Russia, taking into account Israel. It's a complicated thing. So for me, behind the scenes, it was really interesting. The thing that's bothersome to me is this Politico guy sat there in stealth mode, knowing that he, being anti-Trump, was collecting evidence to use against them instead of saying, whoa, I shouldn't be in these communications. Somebody remove me. That's where I agree. This is a big mistake. At the same time, that dude should have removed himself.
Totally. 100%. Strongly agree with you. I said as much on my own show, the Josh Hammer Show. By the way, not a whole lot of people making this very important point. I have not heard a lot of people make this very rudimentary point. And you're totally correct, which is that Basic journalistic ethics say if you're not there, get out of there. But again, this can only be understood when you understand who Jeffrey Goldberg is. He is a left-wing activist. He is someone who did more than any other journalist in America to launder Barack Obama's catastrophic Iran nuclear deal to a skeptical American public. He carries water day in and day out for Democrats. So if that kind of guy somehow winds his way into a very high-ranking Republican official group chat there, yes, he should do the right thing, but I'm just saying I'm hardly surprised that he did not do the right thing there. You know, a lot of people are out there praising Jeffrey Goldberg. They're saying, oh, he didn't talk about this strike before it happened there. Okay, well, let's be very clear. If you had done that, that's literally borderline treasonous behavior. That is a plausible legal argument for treason there. So I'm not going to go out and praise him for not acting like a traitor. I'm not going to go out and do that. So yeah, he obviously should have acted differently there. But again, he never should have been in that chat in the first place there. So both things can simultaneously be true at once.
Okay. You've got a new book out. It's doing phenomenal. It's selling out. They're having to replenish it. Israel and Civilization, the Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. Tell me about that book.
Sure. So, and I appreciate it. Yeah, the book's off to a great start. It reached a high of number 3 on all books on all of Amazon last week, which is really quite crazy. So, you know, thank you to everyone who's already purchased it, and if not, it's available everywhere books are sold: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, and so forth. There. So, the main argument, Stephen, in Israel and Civilization is that the word Israel has a double meaning in the title. It's referring, yes, to the state of Israel, but also to the people of Israel, the children of Israel, i.e. the Jewish people. The book was really written in a post-October 7th milieu, and it was written not necessarily in response to October 7th itself, but it was written in response to the horrific reaction, frankly, of many people around the world to October 7th, where instead of siding with Israel, with the forces of Western civilization, a lot of these people sided with the savages, with Hamas, with this medieval Islamist death cult, and their various apologists all throughout the world. So I looked at this on TV and social media, my jaw just dropping to the ground, and I basically said, okay, like it's time that someone wrote a comprehensive book here, basically trying to bring us back to basics, basically trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and reminding all of us here in the West, both Jews and Christians, both religions that share a biblical inheritance there. It's time for us to kind of get back to basics and remind and rejuvenate and remind us what built us and what will therefore make us great and be able to ward off the various threats that seek to ultimately subjugate us. So in the book, Stephen, I argue that there are 3 forces that are seeking to ultimately undermine, destroy Western civilization. Those are wokeism, Islamism, and global neoliberalism, basically the World Economic Forum, basically John Lennon's song Imagine playing out on a global stage. So they're trying to eradicate all the borders and distinctions that make us human there. The point is that Jews and Christians share the exact same threats. And the reason we share the same threats is because we share a similar inheritance there. So the book is fundamentally calling for a joint Jewish-Christian ecumenical biblical restoration project. The capital S state of Israel is that just on the geopolitical stage. So the same way that the Jewish people are the canary in the coal mines for broader societal rot, the same way that all anti-Semites from Karl Marx to Hamas and so forth know that you start with the Saturday people, you start with the Jews, then you move on to the Sunday people. Anti-Semites have understood that all throughout history. Israel is just that on a global chessboard. The people that are seeking to eradicate the nation state, and yes, they really are trying to do that. Soros, Open Society Foundation, they're really, really trying to do that there. They start with Israel because it is the Jew of the nation, so to speak there. It also happens to be the world's oldest nation state, really. I mean, think back to the Bible. You know, when King David unites the tribes of Israel in Jerusalem, that's really the first act of uniting tribes into a concrete nation with clearly defined borders and no extraterritorial ambition there. So they start, I mean, give them kind of diabolical credit. They're being logically consistent. You start with the world's oldest nation state, but they're not going to stop there. They want to march all throughout Europe. They want to subsume all of Europe into this amorphous globalist blob. They obviously want to come here to North America and the United States as well there. All that's in the book. The book covers a lot of terrain, but again, Israel and Civilization, the Fate of the Jewish Nation, and the Destiny of the West.
Okay. I look forward to going through that, and my audience, I'll put direct links down below. I personally believe, as a Christian, Christians and Jews uniting even more than we are now could do a lot for raising the morals, the values of Western civilization. Why do you believe that Islam and Judaism struggle to get along, where Christianity and Judaism seem to, I don't want to say be best friends, but they get along quite well.
Well, I think that Islam, let me just note that Islam historically has not just had an issue with the Jewish people. Islam and Christianity arguably have an even more tumultuous history than Islam and Judaism, actually. I mean, Islam and Christianity were at war 1,000 years ago during the Crusades. There were horrific Muslim-Christian wars during the 1600s, 1500s. I mean, the Siege of Vienna, which is kind of the high watermark of the Ottoman Turks getting deep into the heart of Europe there. It was literally in Vienna, Austria, is when they were finally turned back. That was in the second half of the 17th century. I mean, only about 100 years before America was formed. I mean, look at the history of America's wars, actually. So after America has its Revolutionary War against the British, our next two wars were against the Muslim pirates, actually, the Barbary Wars, the first and second Barbary Wars off the northern coast of Africa. So, frankly, really, Islam and Christianity, as well as Islam and Judaism, have been at war for a very, very long time there. But, Stephen, I mean, sometimes I think people overthink this point. It's really quite straightforward. I'm Jewish. Our Bible, which we call the Tanakh, it's half your Bible. I mean, we literally share a lot of our understanding.
More than half.
Yeah, I mean, based on page numbers, it's actually literally more than half. You're right there. I recently noticed that myself. Actually, I actually was at a library and I know it's a Christian Holy Bible. I picked it up and I noticed that the New Testament is actually, based on page numbers, actually a lot less than the Old Testament there. So literally more than half. You're totally right. And, so many of the basic values that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis really do come from the Hebrew Bible. I'll give you just a couple of examples there. So, there's the golden rule: treat others as you like to be treated. One of really the things that holds society together as a glue, really kind of maintains these interdependent bonds of mutual loyalty. Where's that coming from? It's coming from Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 19, thou shalt treat a stranger as your own fellow. That's basically the undergird for the golden rule. By the way, speaking of the book of Leviticus there, last time I checked the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, there was a verse on the outside, not from Cicero or Aristotle, but it was a verse from the Bible, from Leviticus. Thou shalt proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all the inhabitants thereof. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson famously wanted the national seal of the United States to be Moses parting the Red Sea. Abraham Lincoln, my personal favorite figure in American history, famously spoke of Americans as an almost chosen people. Lincoln was what was a devout, biblically literate Christian. I mean, this notion that Jews and Christians somehow don't need each other, it's being pushed right now online by certain people, by certain provocateurs that are trying for their own cynical reasons to try to drive a wedge between our two religions there. But my argument in the book is that this cannot happen, that it would only be a disaster there, and that a society that forsakes the Jewish people historically, going back since time immemorial, is a society that is not ultimately headed for anything other than its own ruin and decay.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Dennis Prager, and he's been preaching this for 40 years, and so, okay. Wanted to just switch gears with you. I saw something that was kind of disturbing to me. I want to get your thoughts on it. So this is over in Wyoming. They say that they are mad at Elon Musk. They're mad at Donald Trump. And so what are they doing? They're spray painting swastikas over all of the Tesla cars and the Tesla charging stations. And they're saying that Elon is a Nazi and that they are supporting the Jews too much. And then yet they use the symbolism of Hitler and the Nazis in order to spread the message. Your thoughts on all of the hate on Elon, and then trying to use Nazism, the horribleness of Hitler, as a comparison to Elon and Donald Trump, who obviously are not.
It's just so disgusting, Stephen. I mean, Donald Trump is by word and deed not merely the most pro-Israel president in American history. He's the most pro-Jewish president, at least since Abraham Lincoln. I mean, maybe since George Washington, frankly. I mean, Donald Trump has Jewish grandchildren. I mean, his daughter Ivanka Trump converted to Judaism to marry Jared Kushner. I know that because, like the Kushners, I live in South Florida. I literally know where the Jewish day school where Donald Trump's Jewish grandchildren go to school. So, I mean, this notion that he is an anti-Semite is utterly ludicrous. He went above and beyond to protect Jewish students on campuses during his first administration. He had this landmark executive order on Title VI back in 2019. He's picked up right where he left off the last time around. He's had numerous executive orders already trying to get this joint anti-Semitism task force in place there. So it's not just the state of Israel, where he's obviously a great friend and ally as well, but he's a tremendous friend of the Jewish people. And frankly, Stephen, as a religious Jew, as someone here in South Florida, when I go to Orthodox synagogues, I never meet anyone who didn't vote for Donald Trump. It's unheard of, frankly. There's this huge political divide in America between religious Jews and more secular Jews. The latter are definitely mostly Democrats. But it's important, I think, for people to understand that religious Jews who actually do Judaism day in and day out there, are overwhelmingly MAGA, overwhelmingly Republican there. This is a point that I think a lot of people, unfortunately, just don't understand there. Elon Musk himself there, Elon Musk literally went with my friend Ben Shapiro to Auschwitz. I mean, Elon Musk was literally there at Auschwitz there. He spoke very movingly of it there. He still wears a dog tag. I mean, Elon Musk to this day, unless I'm wrong, I think to this day, he literally still wears the October 7th hostage dog tag to remind him that there are still hostages in Gaza. So, I mean, this notion that he is anti-Semitic is nuts. It's absolutely nuts there. It says nothing good about these people and what they're spray painting, but I mean, they're just dead wrong. They are, simply put, just completely dead wrong as to who these men are.
Yeah, it's interesting how they use fascism to try to point out that their enemy is a fascist. It's the oldest playbook, right? But they continue to try to do that. Elon Musk grabbing his heart, throwing it to the crowd. Suddenly, what? He's like a disciple of Hitler? Like, give me a break. It's so insulting. And guess what? Every time you compare a good person to Nazis and Hitler, you water down the real bad guy.
Exactly.
Which was Adolf Hitler. And to me, that's offensive and bothersome. Josh, I want to put a direct link down below. Where can people pick up your book?
Yeah, sure. So thanks as always, Stephen. So the book's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, basically wherever you get your books, including in brick and mortar stores as well there. So Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West.
Okay. You can also check out Josh Hammer podcast, as well as I'll put a direct link to your X down below. Josh, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much.